Artificial intelligence is already inside your company, whether you know it or not. Employees are feeding confidential data into tools like ChatGPT, chasing efficiency without realizing the risks. And here is the hard truth. Protecting your company from AI misuse isn't a tomorrow problem. It's already a yesterday problem. Because what happens when those hidden queries leak your intellectual property to competitors, or when algorithms confidently give you the wrong answer and you make decisions and, even worse, act on it? The efficiency may feel irresistible, but the cost of blind trust could be devastating.
People working in the space are already using AI, right? It's the temptation of getting an answer fast out of your spreadsheet is so.
Kozyrytska has lived this tension from the inside. From winning the Merck Prize at MIT to neuroscience research in a Nobel laureate's lab at Stanford to leading global biotech strategy at Thermo Fisher and Sartorius, she has seen how fragile trust can be when technology collides with human lives. And today, as co-founder of Collins and the cell therapy manufacturability program, she's building frameworks for confidential collaboration, where artificial intelligence accelerates breakthroughs without sacrificing privacy or ethics.
But if you're working on some obscure target, this is your super highly confidential IP, you want to get some intelligence about the research, for example.
In this conversation, Kat unpacks how CEOs, investors, and innovators can turn artificial intelligence from a reckless risk into a tool that embeds values, safeguards IP, and even amplifies humanity's best instincts.
If we know that a personalized therapy will work better for the patient, it is almost our obligation.
Believe me, this episode is not just about artificial intelligence, it's about responsibility and decision making. It's about how leaders can harness technology to build a future where therapies are safer, more personal, and more ethical. But before we dive in, let me ask you one thing. I have looked at the numbers today and found out that only about 20% of you who listen regularly actually follow the show. If this episode sparks your curiosity, please do me a favor. Hit that follow button. It helps me grow the show and bring you more conversations like this with rare deep tech leaders, entrepreneurs, and venture capitalists. Entirely for free to you. And now let's get started. Then let's go online and talk a little bit about dark personalities, which is a great. How did you come up with this term?
Why didn't? This is an industry term.
Oh, really? It is
Yeah,
in the
yeah, yeah.
entire industry.
See, I'm telling you, we have so much research on this. We
Yeah.
already know.
You have an impressive background. Thank you very much for your detailed preparation material. Just for the audience, you studied biology at the MIT in Boston. How
Correct.
how
Mhm,
how
mhm.
wa- how wa- how was that?
Well, I thought I was good at math, so I started on math. And then I met people who were good at math, and then so maybe physics is for me. So I kept moving through engineering and chemical engineering, and then uh, eventually I found biology, and it just seemed like such an opportunity to model and learn in this kind of physics rational based approach. And it really felt like at that point we weren't really there. I mean, I would argue we're still not really there, but I think we have a vision. We can now we have such an explosion of these physics based cell models. So I think we're finally getting to this place of understanding. So I think it was a good choice in the end.
Yeah, I believe that. And I read in your material you earned the Merck Prize for outstanding research.
Yes, I was in this great lab that, for me, I think was a real preview of this fusion of biology with core mechanistic understanding. So I was in Kathy Drennan's lab, working on crystallography, protein engineering, looking at modifying the active
Mhm.
site. You could look at it at the very granular level of electron density. You could see where the electrons were moving as
Mm.
the binding occurred, and it was just so beautiful. And, you had the 80% training set, the 20% test set. So it was kind of already a foundation for me for understanding how we train models.
Reminds me of the series Big Bang Theory because there was this one guy from MIT, the MIT engineer, and you pretty much replayed it in your life because you started at MIT and then decided to move to the West Coast,
Yes.
to Stanford. But how was the cultural shock for you from East Coast to West Coast?
Yes. So these are very different schools,
Mm.
and I was teaching while I was at MIT, and then I was teaching again at Stanford. And just the different approaches with the undergraduate students I found to be fascinating. So, MIT, we have some good weather, but most of the year it's bad weather. You're in the library, at least back in the day, you were in the library. And at Stanford, it's sunny the
Oh,
vast
yeah.
majority of the year. So you walk out of the classroom and you kind of lie down on the grass with your device or your textbook. And it was shocking to me to see students outside enjoying themselves, enjoying the weather. It was unthinkable, but a completely different approach. I think the sun definitely helps in general for our species to lift the spirits. So, yeah, I think from that perspective, it's a good place, California.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. I mean, it's so fascinating what you said. MIT, Boston, cloudy weather, rainy weather, not much sunshine. It's perfect for studying. And then I always wondered in California, I mean, you have the ocean, you have the beach, surfing, music. Reminds me of Baywatch in the 80s, 90s, the series, which is just on Amazon Prime. How how
Yeah.
how do people do that in California? That they say, no, I go to the lab and get my work done, and rather than enjoying the sun.
So at Stanford, there's a kind of an expression or hypothesis that it's all this kind of duck approach where you pedal very hard beneath the surface where it's invisible, but you're working really, really hard. And then
Yeah,
from the
yeah.
surface, it's all very still and peaceful. And I think it's that internal drive to get things done, especially in science, right? I mean, we don't get paid a whole lot to scientists. So it's clearly not for some external motivation that we're doing things. It's really that the wish to explore, find answers, make this world a better place, save lives. Some of those things I think drive the just tremendous amount of progress that happens in a sunny location at an academic institution.
That's fantastic. So you have background mathematics, biology, and then I read in your material you then worked in neuroscience in a Nobel laureate's lab. How was that?
Oh, it was fantastic. I mean, so Tom Zudoff, he got his Nobel Prize in 2013, and his brain is definitely the fastest that I have encountered. And I mean, I think of myself as quite sharp,
Yeah.
but talking to him was it's always so many steps and sentences ahead. I remember just in these conversations trying to catch up. Like I sort of see how we got from here to here. Okay, yeah. But yeah, he's just so bright. He sees the big picture. He's a very molecular person, but then also thinks about very, let's say, abstract ideas. And so I love the lab because he built it to be everything from crystallography all the way through to animal behavior with some profound implications for human disease. And so it's the spectrum that the kind of horizontal and vertical nature of his enterprise. It was a huge lab, 70 people, right? So you can get a lot of things done with 70 people,
Mhm.
but it's just such an explosion of ideas. I am hoping to. So it's an anniversary of his lab this year, so I'm headed to the symposium. To reconnect with some of these bright minds and bring some of the thoughts that we're going to cover today to that community to get their feedback.
That's fantastic. So from Boston back to, you're now in Boston, I guess, and then back to sunny California, enjoying the.
The travel or even the whole move, packing up my things into a few boxes and stuff. Who could possibly resist that?
So you moved from mathematics to biology, from biology to neuroscience, and now landed in artificial intelligence and ethics. What sparked
Mm.
your interest in that area?
I mean, it's sort of a part of my natural journey. I think for me, when I think about understanding something, it's really understanding it to that molecular level. And so that's why neuroscience has always been so fascinating, because you observe the high level human behavior. And through my, I'm going to say, unfortunate in many ways experience, I've observed a range of human behavior. So I think for me, it's trying to understand how does that work molecularly. And so neuroscience is tempting because we're on the cusp of molecular understanding, but not really quite there yet. And I don't know if we will be. I hope that we will be, but it's getting these answers at that protein level or atomic level resolution to the very big picture things.
That's fantastic. In your material, there was another interesting point. You said that there is a lot of yesterday's problems in artificial intelligence. What do you mean with that?
I think we especially in life sciences, we kind of think of this, in a few years, we'll get to artificial intelligence. Eventually, we'll collect a large enough data set. Oh, we have to go fund this collection of et cetera, et cetera. But the truth is that people working in the space are already using AI, right? It's the temptation of getting an answer fast out of your spreadsheet is so vast, nobody can resist it, really. I mean, a few people do, but vastly, it's I want this answer, and I'm not going to spend the 5 hours on it. I plug it into ChatGPT, and then here it is, the response. So I think from that perspective, we have to face the reality that employee education, employee adherence to your policies has to become a priority, because people will, and this has already happened in the industry, right? People will put confidential documents into Chat GPT. It's, I would argue, not with a malicious intent, but it's due to the lack of understanding of the profound impact of sharing that kind of information with an AI tool. So yes, it cuts some corners and makes your days smoother, shorter, and so on. But the big picture of the impact of that is, yeah, we really have to be thoughtful about um, how we guide employees in using AI-based tools. And I would argue that if you're not offering an alternative that is in accordance with your compliance policy, governance, and so on, they're still going to use it. It's just not going to be according to your rules.
Yeah, regulations. At the end of the day, this is really an interesting part. When we take this conversation into a cafe, and I asked in the next 2 hours, what's the big idea you want the world to understand right now? What would you say?
Yeah, I think the big picture view of this is that artificial intelligence is a great way to scale, throughput, amplify, right? Bring efficiency and so on. But I think what I would love for us to pause and think about, what is it that we want to amplify? What is it that we're high throughputing? Because we have studied ourselves as a species. We understand there's a range of behaviors, right? There's the good behaviors, there's the bad behaviors. I would argue that we should really focus on amplifying the good behaviors and try our very best to slow down or stop the amplification of the bad behaviors, right? Because if you think about this from the extreme view, if you used to have those people on Craigslist, right, who they tried to get your check and so on, now they can do that at high throughput because you no longer have to have the human behind it. So how can we put some guardrails in place, some safeguards to make sure that that quiets down, and all of the goodness in this world that takes more effort and so on, that we bring efficiency to that we do better, more ethical things.
Isn't that an unusual thinking for a scientist? I mean, when I look on LinkedIn, um, the AI discussion is mostly driven by science, and I read a lot about we have a new target. AI makes finding molecules so much easier, and we can simulate everything. So it's a lot of tech and features. And you come from a different angle and say, no, it's all about ethics and morale. How did you come to the conclusion that we need a different discussion in this space, not just tech driven, but above it?
I will say that I'm also a technologist and a scientist, so I want answers. I can't wait for us to have the answers. For example, part of my work is in cell therapies, manufacturability. I think if we could get the answer to that faster, that'd be amazing. But I think so much of the conversation, like you said, is driven by people who are really focused on tech or people who really have that question about science. If we just take a step back and think about the impact of some of these answers that we're going to get, we can think about that from the perspective of reliability, right? So, yeah, we implement the tech, but how reliable is what we're getting out of it? I think there's a gap on the implementation side that we're often not asking the question, is this good or not? And I think for more conventional technologies, right? If we think about capital equipment, if you have a box and you ship it and the bolts fall out, it's very obvious that it's not good. Or if you have like a microscope that's not aligned, very
Mm,
clear.
mm,
There's no question about that. I think with software, these Gen AI especially, it's just harder to evaluate. So you have to think about that up front. And then the other side of it is on the patient's rights side. So we can get into more depth on this, but there are so many studies that show that that de-identification, anonymization of data is really a myth. So when you ask a question of a data set, and I'm going to bring up 23andMe, right? Because I've been trying to get my data set out of that for the longest time, and it just hasn't worked yet. But some of the answers that you're going to get will impact real humans on the other
mm,
end. So we might be studying clinical impact or even manufacturability, like in cell therapies, right? I believe that we would get tremendous insights if we pulled in clinical outcomes data, but that's going to reveal something about those humans. And if a certain entity, so in the US, right, a big player to this is health insurers, if or maybe your auto insurance and so on, right? If they get that insight somehow, because things get uploaded into AI all the time, but that can impact their strategy for pricing for
mm,
insurance. It's just one example, right? So now there's real financial impact for the individuals who are within that data set. And I think we have to think about that. We, as much as we want to get to a scientific answer, we have to think about the humans involved.
mm. Yeah, it's a good point. Let me challenge you on this. So
Mhm.
I'm now proud to say that I'm 51 in my 52nd year on this planet, and
So
I can now say to you, young woman, um,
let's go with
I'm
that.
I'm living in Europe, and
Mhm.
this regulation is driving me crazy. I experienced the internet, and we are just fine at the end of the day. So we can play around, we should experiment, and at the end of the day, nothing serious happened. And Europe is thriving, the US is thriving, and we really have a great time with technology. And we needed all these mistakes that we made to come to this point where we are now, and it's a clear upstream. So the West evolved in a good way. Global poverty went down in also other countries, and technology is a blessing for humans. When you look now at the European Union, we want to regulate everything, which leads to the position that AI in Europe is hindered and development accelerated in the US and also in China. Interestingly, communist country doing better than Europe. Now, what you propose, what I understood is, no, we need to be more careful with artificial intelligence. So, how would you convince someone like me who says completely arrogantly, young lady, I have experienced the last 30 years and we will be fine in future? Convince me. Why should we be more careful with that tool?
Yeah, so right, I mean, you want to see some to become more worried
Mm,
about the topic of human rights,
mm,
patient rights, and so on. Equality, right, is another big one. You want to see some massive fallout. You want to see a big impact on someone. That's what we're as humans, right?
mm,
With our neurobiology reacts to these extremes. But with some of the impact, it's with AI, especially, it's less obvious, less visible, and you may, in fact, never see it. Especially because some of the models are less transparent and so on, right? So I think an example to bring up here is with mortgage eligibility assessments.
mm,
You will never know why somebody truly got rejected by an algorithm. But it might be because the algorithm was built on some historical data where we have historically discriminated against a particular category. that category is probably not, the ruling class, so they will have even less of a voice in expressing that. But I think it's that if we want to build the future to be better, at the very core of this, if we want to build a future that's better than the past, we have to think about this. I know it's less, dollar driven, but in some ways, I think the implementation of AI and the development of this technology is an opportunity for us to reset and again, right, amplify the better things that we do. Um, the way I think about it is that we're really here, every one of us, for such a split second. So, yes, I understand we need cash to survive. I get that. I live in Boston, so I understand this in a profound way. But it's also that you can't really take cash with you after you die. I think that's very clear. So why are you here for this split second? Do you want to leave this place a better place than when you came here? So I think fundamentally it's that. And I think it's just such a chance for us to do better.
Yeah, let's hope that when you knock on heaven's door, that someone doesn't ask you where's your credit card and show me your Bitcoin wallet. We never know. We never know. But let's go back to more serious things. I mean, but this is a huge problem at the end of the day because we need data to use artificial intelligence to improve the human societies across the globe. On the other hand, it also puts us at risk. How can we do that? I mean, let's just think about creating new therapeutics. Scientists always complain that they can't access data. There is so many data around failed clinical trials would be beneficial for scientists, but these are data sets connected to human beings, and you have the names and you have the genetic profile sometimes in there and all their health history. But there is also
Yeah.
the danger of how can we deal with that, in your opinion? Do you have a solution for that problem?
So I think to your point, the rare disease is a really interesting example of that, right? Where it's if you have 17 patients around the world, you're probably going to know which row in the table is who. So
Mm.
it's fairly straightforward to find out. But in fact, because the options are very limited for disease, there's a massive drive on the patient side. They're happy to donate whatever data you want. Their mother's maiden name. Yes, have that if that's going to help with the therapy, right? So talking to, also in pediatric cancers, for example, if you talk to the parents, they will say, we will give anything, our own, the child's data, and so on, because we want the answer. So I think it's that balance of the benefit versus the cost and the risks involved, right? And I mean, if the people within the data set want to donate their data in order to get something, it's their data, surely. I mean, they can decide, but I think
Mm.
they need to also understand the impact of sharing that data. I think we do not spend enough time explaining that there's not a real way to de-identify and anonymize. And so much research has been done on the topic of re-identification even before the LLMs became, this so widely accessible with such a potential to uncover insights and identities. And it's inconvenient to share that information with the patients or donors of data. So I understand, kind of practically why we don't want to do that. But I think we can think about better ways of conveying that information than like a 5-page legal contract. And we can think about how we consent these patients. So, for example, my situation, I was in the hospital. I was convinced there was a good chance I was not going to make it to the end of the day. And somebody gives me this paper. Do you want to participate in the research? We're going to cut this and that out of you, and then we want to analyze this tissue. I haven't slept in 3 days. I don't even know what the words are that you were saying. So it's not a good way to consent people, right? So I think we have to think about how we do this really informed decisions on the part of patients, and especially people who are donors, right? Who just want to do this for the goodness of the planet, of humanity. With longevity research, for example, the UK Biobank is such an amazing data set. So there are lots of healthy people there, and they're donating their data to help the world move forward in this research. So I think there are a lot of people who want to make that happen.
It's an interesting time. Let's stay a little bit at the problem level first before we dive deeper into solutions and also into your history. You have a very interesting vita to talk about. This is the next part. But let's stay defining the problem a little bit better. When I think back to the 80s, basically the online world didn't matter. When I traveled to the United States,
Mm.
it basically meant nobody can find anything about me anywhere online because the online world didn't exist. So I had really the chance and opportunity to create the first impression about myself
Yes,
to a
yes.
new person. Then came the internet, and we started feeding a little bit of data. In the 90s, it was not much; it was mostly science driven. In 2004, Facebook started, and it was the first time when people were motivated. Upload your private pictures. Upload you drunk at a party, and share it with
Yes.
your friends. Uh, Usually, people should not do that. It's not very smart because you have these pictures online decades into the future. In the 90s, it didn't exist, luckily for people like me. And when we look further down, and there was a complete shift in messaging online. It started around 2021 with the pandemic, in the pandemic, where social media platforms con- would say convinced and motivated people write articles, post every day. And I think, in my opinion, maybe some AI companies funded some influencers to spread the message. Come on, post every day. And they described the benefits of it. So you find new contacts, you find better business partners. Works everything well. And this is the reason why I started the podcast on one hand. But on the other hand, it means when we post and when we comment, we leave a huge footprint about how we think, how we feel, what we do. You can analyze a lot of data from everybody and also nail down mental illnesses and health
Yes, yes, yes,
problems.
yes, yes. Yes.
And also, when you analyze speech, I think there is also some studies and scientists who want to identify, does this person have any progressing illness? As long as it is a local company, it's probably fine. But companies are bought, sold, acquired, shut down. But this data stays there
Yes.
and
Yes.
is
Yes.
available to other people. So this is something I think nobody sees today, that this data is there forever. And who owns the data can access it. Or do you see artificial intelligence more as a black box where it's not possible to get access to the data?
Oh, and I think even from some of the deep digging that you've done, right? It's very obvious that there are some documents that the AI can find that
Mm.
maybe a human would have with enough time, but it's that throughput piece, right? Um, how much effort, how much diligence would a human be willing to do to really understand somebody? And then if it's a malevolent player, use that information to manipulate them into a
Mm.
certain decision, right? So you're talking about mental illness, but that's clinical, right? If we take non-clinical features, um, there are levers so you can pull with a certain person to get them to say yes. And as a commercial person, I certainly think and hope that every salesperson out there trying to close a deal is doing all the digging to find everything about their customer and find a way to convince them. But on the other side of it, right, from that customer perspective, they might not want to be manipulated, perhaps. And it's a balance. So I think sharing your beliefs um, is tricky because you want to build that connection. I would say that LinkedIn, with all of the information that I've been putting about my own beliefs about kind of how the world should work in the perfect scenario, what I believe about AI and so on. The algorithm is beautiful. It brings me profiles and posts of people who believe the same. It's such a wonderful bonding experience. I love it. I am so grateful for it. Do I also understand that somebody can look at all of this stuff and then convince me of things much more easily? Yes, absolutely. So I think it's a two-way street, right? And also as an individual, understanding this about yourself, that there's your beliefs are out there in the open. I think you can then be more thoughtful, take proactive approach, and protect yourself from people who might be trying to maneuver you to go one way or the other. Sure. I think it's from the both sides.
Do you think it's possible to manipulate people via social media?
Via social media. I think it's a neurobiology, right? So I think of that in the frame reference of the person themselves. There are some previous experiences that make people more vulnerable, right? Some foundational neuronal signaling pieces that perhaps make them more prone to risky behaviors, decision making, right? All of that is open science questions. What comes to mind for me is when I was at MIT, we were it's a huge deal because it was the first casino that was approved in Massachusetts. And the backlash of that, right? The academic discussion about that topic was so prominent because it was all about the addiction and how gambling triggers this fundamental neural circuits that it's difficult to overcome some of that because it's that lizard brain. It's who we were before we had the massive thinking analytical cortex. So once somebody taps into that inside, it's hard. It's just practically very hard to overcome that. And so some of the conversations that were live at the time, right, was how can we protect people? How can we identify people who are more vulnerable to these influences? And I think some of it is the people themselves understanding, okay, I'm vulnerable from this perspective. So I'm going to be more protective of myself. I'm going to put these features in place in my life to make sure I'm not influenced. I don't gamble because I think that that's probably a weakness for me. So I don't want to try it. I don't want to touch it. But that's something I'm doing for me. And I think taking some of that control into your own sphere, building your life to protect yourself is just it's key. We can regulate everything to death, but at the end of the day, you have to be protective of your own self.
Yeah, it's a balance act between getting the benefits out of a new technology, but avoiding the risks, and I think it takes time. You mentioned before the dossier I created about you when I prepared. I mean, it was really tempting. You wrote a lot about deep personalities and ethics, and I just thought at one point, I haven't done that for a long time because ChatGPT a couple of months ago didn't really respond well to questions about people. It always feedback, no, it's not possible, and it's a private person and not a public person, not a superstar. So I just gave up on that. And when I read your messages, I thought, when we talk about dark personalities, now I play the dark personality and try to find everything out about you with ChatGPT, deep research. And I didn't really have high expectations that I get something meaningful back. And suddenly I got, I think it was 10 pages or something like that with
Oh,
references and links, and they pulled
yes.
everything together. Where you grew up, that you were in MIT, at Stanford, which lab, every single video and conferences where you spoke. So all this data came back in a Word document. It was really impressive.
I agree. You, in fact, uncovered some of the documents I did not know were online. And what I did
Yeah,
after that is I emailed those organizations to take those documents down.
really.
We will see how well that works. I think that's another piece, right? Taking control of your own data.
Mhm.
I think what we often don't think about is that, in fact, we still have ownership of the Facebook, Instagram, and so on data. So you can take it down. It's completely within our rights.
Mhm.
So. Hmm.
But the thing is, I mean, it works really well with a, would say, affordable version of ChatGPT. But you can also ask other questions. You can also dig into uh, what weaknesses does this person have? How does the personality function of this person? What are the spots where I should tackle myself when we talk about dark personalities? I mean, we have to admit it. There are not always always just good humans out there, and humans evolve in their lifetime, and sometimes they are good, sometimes they are bad, and sometimes they don't know that they are bad or doing something badly in
This
society.
I disagree with. This I
Really?
disagree with. I think that they know. We have evidence to suggest that they know. They just
Do
choose not to do the right thing.
do we have the evidence?
Yeah, the research. If you ask
Mhm.
people who do bad things, that it, they know. I think for us, it's much more comforting to think that they didn't know. Um, like if you could listen to the interviews of victims of Epstein, they want to tell him. Some of them are sad that he's dead because they won't be able to tell him now what damage he delivered to their lives. I think research suggests he knew.
Mm.
He just sort of didn't really care, and he was happy, in fact, perhaps, to have delivered the damage. It's a very different framework of thinking. I don't know Epstein, but again, looking at the academic research, I think there's just every bit of evidence to suggest that it's a different operational mindset.
So basically, what we have to accept is the fact that there will always be humans who are bad actors and do something that harms other people on purpose.
Yeah. So the current estimates are that in the general population, that's about 5%. In prisons, it's between 16 and 25. And the reason there's such a large readout scale, right, is because it's not a hard measure. And interestingly, in leadership, the percentage is enriched to about 10%, according to academics who study this. So I think the way that our society is built, it's sort of rewards some of these behaviors that are very self-focused, self-oriented, um, but maybe even beyond that, right? That it's in their very different mindset. The other people are like 2D. They're not the same kind of a person or a being. They're very flat. And I think that it's so hard to embrace this. For me, I think it was kind of like learning that Santa Claus doesn't exist, right? It's that very traumatic experience of understanding that there are people who look the same, but they operate so differently.
Mm.
But once I got on board with that, everything made so much more sense, right? Like, so I grew up in Ukraine. For us, World War II was like it was happened yesterday.
Mm.
It was always in the daily operations. We always talked about it. Hitler was top of mind, right? It was not something that was a number of decades ago, right? It was daily presence. And we always were taught he was just this one extreme, really bad human. But again, studies suggest that you can have a range of behaviors and a range of executional ability. Sometimes you can have bad intent, but you can't, you just are not a good operations person. So you can't execute on your bad wishes. But it's a much higher fraction of the population. They're recurrent throughout history. We can see examples in
Mm.
the day to day.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the World War II area in Germany and also in Austria is a good example of a really bad system. You can't really sugarcoat that. It's just a bad system, harmful to society across the world. And when I think back to this time, also when I was in school in the 80s and the university in the 90s, it was a constant reminder that we should not do that again and bring that to humanity ever, ever again. And Austria played a huge role in that. Actually, he was Austrian, unfortunately. But when you think back to the 80s, also, I mean, when we had a conversation and we wanted to have a private conversation, it's just house owners could be almost certain that nobody's listening. And this was also the situation in Germany in the 30s and in the 40s. So there was no internet, there was no modern communication. And you state that these bad actors, like in the Third Reich, still exists today. But when you look now at today's technology, we feed everything into the internet. I have a mobile phone, so it's camera, microphone. I have Alexa devices in my house. Uh, Anybody could easily tune in
You
and
are very
listen.
brave to have Alexa devices.
Really? You worried?
Well, I mean, maybe it's my background, but I am the kind of person who stays very manual, with a notebook and so on. So I do not have the smart home.
Oh, really? I have
Well,
every little gadget.
I think it's for that risk of monitoring, right? So an entity can then get a hold of your data. One of the very interesting examples is this study. I'm not going to remember the year at the moment, but they looked at the electricity consumption by the power meter, and essentially, with a model, you can build a model that predicts how many people are in the household and what TV show they're watching, just from that measurement of the power meter, right?
You
So
can
now,
you can you can predict the TV show they are watching from the
Because of the
measurement of the
pixels, pixel brightness.
really.
So now you think about the ownership of that data. Now you have an electricity company that knows how many people are in that whichever apartment at what time
Mm,
of day, what they're watching. I mean, if I were an electricity company trying to make money, I'd probably sell that data to some TV station, right, to help them understand, get some insights and so on. Um, so you just have to be very mindful for that footprint, right? Because somebody might own your data in ways that you do not expect. And this, for example, it was very surprising at the time when they carried out the study, right? That this single readout is predictive of so many things that are with some argument in violation of your privacy of your home and so on. So I think the point that you're making about the connectivity of that data and kind of the pull into some omniscient being your system is a whole new level. And some of what I've been thinking about is how public videography or photography, right? It's not really been regulated in profound ways. So you can have a security camera somewhere and so on, which is not an issue if it's just staying with the security guy who's watching the, whatever 15 screens. But if now that's pulled into some more systemic oversight, it's a very different picture because now you can track people going here and there. And again, the impact through health insurance or auto insurance and so on, you can
mm,
already see how that information can feed and manifest for you very obviously in financial impact. But it's not like you're going to really be able to say, oh, they charged me more because they saw me engaging in some bad behavior somewhere else. It's the intransparency of the output. So, to your earlier point, right? Like, how can we convince ourselves that data is important and we have to care about our privacy? It's a tough argument because it's never in your face, right? The insurance company's not going to say, we charged you $100 more this month because of these things that we saw through these data sources. So I think you just kind of have to think for yourself of the
mm.
impact of sharing some of these pieces.
That's an interesting point. So it could influence pricing strategy when people see that you frequently travel to, for example, just a dumb example, to Monaco. I say, okay, this guy must be rich, and this could be a waiter there. But since he travels every week to Monaco and just on the weekend somewhere to Italy to a cheaper house, they could just assume this is a millionaire or billionaire. Different pricing. That's amazing. When we go back to your roots, you grew up in Ukraine, you mentioned earlier. Um, how did you build your perception towards trust in that environment? Could you share some stories of your youth?
I think it was just a really confusing and difficult time. I'm not sure that trust really was a part of my worldview. I mean, starting with some fundamentals, with the government taking away savings one day, right? With the collapse of the union, they should say, well, you won't be able to withdraw from your savings account.
Really?
And a scene that I remember is just being outside and standing in this line with my grandma, lots of other grandmas standing in that line crying because their whole lives just went to pieces. And it's such a betrayal from the government. It was very difficult to live through. And so, I mean, for me, the way that I processed that at the time is that, oh, they probably needed the money for something more important than the lives of these people. Because it was just easier to think of it that way. And then the crime was so gruesome and so rampant. In retrospect, I think it's because of that loss of oversight. The law enforcement became very weak at the time, so people didn't have the consequences for their bad actions. And so the stuff that was happening, I mean, it's too much. Any crime show you watch, that's nothing compared to what was happening there in the 90s. And so again, for me, was I think easiest to process it in that, well, these people were stealing money, items, people's whatever it is, because they needed it more. In retrospect, having myself then since then lived through situations where I didn't have anything to eat, it's a really high threshold that I cannot imagine how you cross where you take somebody's something I think it's, again, going back to the dark personalities, you have to be of that mindset that
Mm.
somebody else is not a real person. Only you are a real person, so you're authorized to just take from them. Since then, I've adopted a different point of view that I think it takes a different approach and different way of seeing the world.
That's an interesting point. I always thought it was a blessing, the change from the communist system to the open era, and it was more a smooth process and sunshine into capitalism. So it was not, it was really hard
There
for
was
you.
sunshine. There was just no running water, but sunshine we had.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but
How,
I
how
think it was a very rough transition for the country. And I know we think of the horrible things that are happening in Ukraine now as this, a unique experience, but it's in my time there, it was never really good.
so you also experienced the last days then basically of the old Soviet Union. How was that?
Well, I will also preface this with that because Soviet Union is a very large country, and in the Tsarist time was also very large with poor communication systems. So when you think of the collapse of the Union, it actually took a few years to propagate that to remote regions like where I'm from. It wasn't like a instant change for us, and the mindset it was still present there. So we were talking about how for example, commercial activity was so shamed for, so judged. If you sold something somewhere, if you bought something somewhere and then sold it somewhere else for more, public shaming for that kind of an activity. And so for me, I think moving to the US with this very commercial mindset, and I've been in a lot of commercial functions. I am through and through an ROI person. Is just a massive shift in thinking that, in fact, yes, you're adding value by even, let's say, moving goods from over here to over here. That's a value add for someone because they maybe are not able to access this location. Just as simple as that.
So there was, but how did the Soviet Union then function at the end of the day when there was no commercial activity?
Excellent, excellent question. But I think it was a lot of show off, right? I mean, just like during the hunger times, just demonstrating that things are going really well inside the country. So whatever, by selling wheat and other goods to other countries, well, you have your own people dying of hunger, right? It's a lot
Mhm.
of showing, demonstrating this external success, while internally the operations were less than good, right? Lots of deficits. Again, people standing in line. This is before my time, but my parents' time. Lots of waiting in lines for the limited groceries at the store, and then I think it was a bit better after that. But then my time, again, you couldn't even buy anything. There was no food to buy. And for a country that's married to cheese and sausage, to not have cheese and sausage one day, you could not buy for any amount of money. You could not buy these two key ingredients for the kind of music. It was very difficult. It was a complete redo, reset. People rethought how they operated, what they ate. Their whole lives changed in major ways.
What were the main differences in how the system was set up when you compare, both sides, the Soviet Union and, the US? What were the main differences on the economic side from the setup perspective?
I mean, I think in some ways the Soviet Union operated in a non-sustainable way, which is sort of why we ended up where we ended up in the end. So I'm not sure that operationally the system could succeed. But I think it's the trust, right? Going back to the trust, you trust the government to take care of you. Um, if you needed support, I think that social piece was more in place. But also, if you put all homeless people in prison, that really reduces your homeless population. That's an easy fix right there. So I think some solutions were, again, on the external, let's show off how good things are side. And so I think all the movies you watch, right? You have the tourists kind of going down that main street, and
Mm.
then just as they go off the street, it's a completely different set of ruins. Now you don't have painted buildings and ruins. I thought this was a thing of the past, maybe the 60s. No, I went to St. Petersburg in 2013, I think it was. The same. You go down the main street, painted buildings, you turn off the main street. It's nobody has painted that in a very long time. So I think it's still very much this, or at least at the time, was very show based, very external perspective. And I think it's just not a sustainable way of living because essentially you're not building the inside. If you take that to the personal framework, right? Away,
Mhm.
forget the government. But for yourself, if all you're projecting all day long is success, but at the core you're dying on the inside, it's not a sustainable way of living. You have to have some positivity inside, then you deliver it to the outside.
Mhm. And in comparison to what you experienced in the old Soviet Union, when you contrast that with your experience in the United States, how would you describe that?
I think in some ways it's a completely different way of living, right? I mean, commercial is so front and center in the US, but I think there's still a lot of this surface level. Everything's very good. How are you doing? Right. The answer to that for me was shocking. Shocking. Somebody from Eastern Europe coming in. And I really struggled with this the first few years. And I deeply apologize to people that I interacted with during that time. But when they asked me how I'm doing, I thought the answer was to actually then describe
Mhm.
how I'm doing, which was not very good those first few years. Let's put it that way. But the answer to that is great. I'm doing great, or I'm doing well. So it's some of the features are actually really similar. And as an aside, there are people who've written about the similarities between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, infrastructure wise, just how maybe it's a big country thing, but there are academic studies, there are theses that have been made about how similar the countries are, and I think those are just really fascinating pieces to read because we think of them as so polar opposite, right? Cold War and so on, but in some ways these are really really similar countries.
That's interesting. That's interesting. I mean, at the end of the day, it leads all back then to artificial intelligence. When you talk about the Soviet Union, when I understood you right, it was more a centralized system where basically you let the government decide what's best for you, and you don't have to think. They make the decisions. You just have to agree. That's everything that you have to do at the end of the day.
You just have to live. I'm not even sure the agreement is so much a part of it. You just kind of go on.
Yeah, and there was no room for personal development at the end of the day. So every commercial activity was shamed. Selling something to another person to make more money at the end of the day, to invest in yourself, in your personal development, was not an option. Uh, Compared to the US, which is completely the opposite at the end of the day. So it's more selfish. People are looking more for themselves and their benefit and their profit, make deals and have to be sure that the other side takes care of their win, and they just have to take care of their own win. And the government has a role to, compared to the Soviet Union, to put a little bit of framework in place so that people can transact and the economy thrives. And that's all. But it's more self-centered than the Soviet Union. Uh, what was good in the Soviet Union and what was good in the and what is good in the US, when you could combine that, the best of two worlds, into one system, what would you choose?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a super interesting question. And maybe just to comment to what you said, I think part of the reason that in a very capitalist society, right, you have to be taking care of yourself is because there is not a social system that will take care of you if you have a dip in income or when you retire and so on. So it's a two-way street, right? And I'm sure a lot of people would be willing to spend less time building own wealth if they knew that there was that support network. So I think in terms of combining the two approaches, maybe I'll lean on education here. I think some of the really different things for me, and maybe it's because I was a student when I came here first, was that in a lot of classes, it was about this analytical thinking, right?
Mhm.
You take math, you take English, you think about what is it that you're doing. I think the Soviet Union is very much about memorization. So there is a right answer. It's that right answer. And all you need to do, memorize what that is, and then deliver that answer. Uh, for example, exams for us, right? It was always you memorize word for word what the responses are to the 30 questions. You come in, you pull out the ticket, you know the number of the ticket, so you already know what the questions are because you've memorized them. And then when I came here, every week we were writing an essay on what the author thought and what did you think about what the author thought, and it was overwhelming just in like how much space there is to think about things. And I think for me, I mean, I've been here a very long time, but for me, this thinking part, it's really only, I would say, fairly recently that I've really come to embrace that, right? That one is authorized and perhaps even rewarded for having one's own point of view. And other people may disagree with that point of view, but that's okay. So I think there's some value to the diversity of thinking, and I think there are a lot of other countries that are built in that memorization framework that have very similar people coming from those countries to the U.S. have that very similar experience to mine, where there's diversity of thought is very exciting. So I think that's to me that's something really valuable. Bringing this back to AI, right? Some of the conversations are you wanted to in the past 2 years ago, if you wanted to get an answer to something, you asked, 5, 10, 30 different experts and you got different answers. They aligned on something, they diverged on something else. Now, if you want an answer, you go to ChatGPT and get one answer. I have yet to see a post on LinkedIn about somebody doing a same query for ChatGPT, let's say for science, 10 times, or maybe between ChatGPT, Perplexity, and so on, right? To get that same flavor of diversity of thought. So I think this
Mhm.
convergence on a single point of view is in some ways quite terrifying and a big shift for a country like the US. So we'll see how we handle that. And to your earlier point about kind of maintaining that source of truth, right? If the one answer that you rely on is coming from your AI tool, how can we make sure that the information that it spits out is reliable and is true? And there's some, let's say, global efforts, right, to maintain a source of truth somewhere so that we can reference that source of truth so the history does not get rewritten by AI tools through generative means.
There are two interesting points. I think this discussion about
Just
your
two, come on, Christian, just two. I yapped for so long.
just two, not more. Don't give you more. But it's more a sorry for being impolite. It's more a time restriction. Otherwise, we discuss 8 hours. So I try to
Right, thank you.
pull out two and not devalue the others, but two sparked my curiosity. One, I think, what you mentioned, this understanding of social systems is important to understand the risks of AI. Um, you're one of the rare people who experienced both systems, the East, the old East, and the West. And I don't think humans changed much in the last 100 years. Technology evolved, but I think on a psychological level, we are still the same as humans. And humans gravitate together in groups, and when they are in groups, they create societies. And we have so many examples of different societies. And now we amplify that with AI. This is why I think this discussion about what systems were there out there, which
Uh,
specifics did they have, what's the comparison, what's the good side in the US, what's the good side in the Soviet Union,
yes,
what's the bad side, is really important to understand what we then amplify at the end of the day with AI.
yes, super interesting point. And just to corroborate, right there, a lot of the training data that went in
Mm.
was English based. So I think it'll be interesting to see do different regions then develop once they localize, right? And there's some efforts now in the Nordics to do that. Once you localize that and you train with your special data, let's just say we focus on the language side. But are you going to get different answers based on that? And is that going to be more reflective of the kind of social system that is in place, right? I mean, I did not come up with this idea at all, but some of the folks who look at the globe say that this community versus self focus is a gradient as you go from east to west. And you can agree or disagree, but I think maybe AI is where we're going to be able to test some of that those
Mhm.
hypotheses. It'll be
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, no, totally agree. And the other point that I found compelling was what I really didn't think about so far, uh, trusting AI too fast. The old days were basically when I had a problem, I had to ask myself through a lot of people. Just thinking back in the 80s in school, when I couldn't solve homework, I had to call friends. Then I have to identify one who solved it from 30 possible hits. So I
Yes.
got a lot
Yes.
of information. I had to evaluate the information. It's not that when I ask someone and say that this is the answer, that I could assume it's the right answer. And our teachers in the 80s and 90s said, Christian, start thinking for yourself. Always come up with your own opinion. And now we have
Yes.
AI, and AI risks, if I understood you right, that people just take an answer from an AI as already proven and don't think twice.
Yeah, and I think again, some of this is the fundamental neurobiology. It's that lizard within us. I think mm, that trust in another, this is well studied. You can take specific behavioral steps to build trust with another. Hopefully, you're doing it for the right reason. But we can talk about the malevolent players as well. And so I think when we look at AI, we think this is an expert because it's analyzed a lot of data. And that's one piece, right? This
Mhm,
perceived expertise, perceived knowledge, then for us, through the heuristics that we use, translates to trust.
mhm,
Uh, the other side of it is the confidence. If we see somebody confident, we start trusting them more because of that tone of delivery. And ChatGPT is always really confident in the answer that it delivers. I mean, it's like the absolute truth that there is. I did not yet write an article about this, but I just thought this fascinating. So I like to stay on top of the tech trends. I think of myself as a very data-driven soul. So I wanted to optimize the performance of my posts on LinkedIn, and I asked ChatGPT for some suggestions. With confidence, it delivered a whole list of suggestions. Meanwhile, some of them involve buttons that do not exist.
mhm, mhm.
I mean, it's not possible to execute on the suggestions because the button is not even on the interface. So anyway, but it's that heuristic that we translate confidence to knowledge in our minds, and this is ancient knowledge. This the Greeks have figured this out, that if you are on stage and you list some credentials, like that you have analyzed a lot of data, and then you project with confidence and opinion, that just drives trust in the people who are listening to you because of the fundamental neurobiology. So it's like we have to protect, like to the earlier conversation, right? We can focus on fixing chat gpt to express confidence levels. For example, it could say, this is my answer, and I'm about 60% certain. So
Mhm.
that's a technological solution to this. A much faster solution for us to implement is to say, ChatGPT has analyzed a lot of data, but may not be an expert. We acknowledge the confidence with which this tool delivers information. However, this may just be a tone that it's built to use that is not reflective of its own confidence in the answer. So we can take a proactive approach here and protect ourselves from these influences once we become aware of the little things that for us to translate to trust.
That's an interesting point. That's really interesting point. I always thought ChatGPT and LLMs or Gemini or Grok just are a retrieval system that they just do the same like search engines. Go into a library, pick the book that I need to answer my question, and just reproduce the content. But it's not actually. It's not.
Yeah, I mean, it's you typically you do not say, I want this specific book. You say, I want an answer, and then the system sort of has to figure out which books to pull from the shelf to answer
Mhm.
that question. So you have some uncertainty already there, and it might be different time to time or run to run within a given system or between systems. And then the stuff that it pulls out and shows you, that's a whole other side of it. And there's some probabilistic nature to that. So you're going to get variability with that as well. And maybe, like with, sorry, go ahead.
No, no, just keep going.
I think maybe it's like with science, we run the experiment 3 times. So maybe that's something that we could do in the future. You take different ways of measuring a concentration. Maybe that's something that we can um, apply to this tool. But we have to think about reliability as core, and especially as we apply these tools in our professional domain, right? Within pharma, biotech, life sciences, we have such a strict code of conduct that is all about reliability, verifiability of information. And so, yes, to implementation of AI, but I think taking that same approach that we have, the same hesitancy that we have had for all the other tools that we've ever brought in, right? And really assessing it from that reliability, compliance, privacy, whole suite of other things before we move forward with the tech.
Yeah, I totally
Again, as
agree.
a technologist, I am all about implementing technology. I just want to be very clear. I'm all about reaping the benefits of it, but also really putting the framework in place that makes sure that you protect yourself, protect your company IP, protect your know-how, make sure that whatever you deliver to the regulators is true and correct. These fundamental things we have to put in place.
And what you say is contrasted by the marketing of OpenAI, for example, or Grok. They want to convince everybody that it's the best tool and it's always right and will replace human. It's the best expert in the room. And I use it, for example, for analyzing stocks, companies. And
Mhm.
analyzing companies needs a lot of data. And it's really convenient to just upload it and say, make a deep research about this company. But the funny thing and interesting thing is when you ask for recommendation, should I buy this company or not? Public listed companies. ChatGPT or Grok or Gemini come back and say, yeah, it's such a good buy. And it's currently at a low price and has such a prosperous future ahead and you will make a lot of money. They convinced me, and then I said, this can't be right. They just had a 400% uptake in market capitalization the last 6 months. So I go back to these tools and say, but what about the price now? Oh, yeah, the data of the last 3 months is missing. So we didn't look
Yeah,
at that. And
yeah.
when I then go to ChatGPT and say, please look at this data, they
Mhm.
completely change their opinion. So it's not a really good decision-making tool at the end of the day currently at this stage.
Yeah, and I think that's why we are right now very focused on this human in the loop approach that you have. The human,
Mm.
like yourself, is actually thinking about some of the other things that maybe the algorithm didn't take into account when delivering information or suggesting a particular path. I do think that in the long term, human in the loop is going to be very painful and maybe not even practical to maintain that implementation, right? Because first of all, if you have to look into every single thing that your model it pulls out and suggests, it's a lot of extra work.
Yeah.
That's not very interesting. You're doing QC. So um, I think in some ways it's more interesting to actually just do it yourself because then you're on the creation side, you're less on the QC side. I think in pharma biotech, we know QC is a very particular skill set, and some people are exceptional at it, but most people are not. For me, this is reminiscent of my experience when I went from individual contributor to manager. And my work as a manager became a lot of this QC, right? I look through the decks that other people build and like, I would have done it this way, but okay, let's go with your approach. And then all I'm doing is pulling out, looking for errors, right? Because I'm in the end responsible for the output. I'm the human in the loop. But I have to make sure that whatever comes out of our team is the highest quality, that we're operating with the newest information that we have. But it's just a very different flavor of a job when you're going through and on every slide, every number, you're like, is that correct? Versus if I had come up with a number myself, it's a very different nature of work. So I think it will be difficult to retain a workforce that all it's doing is verifying whether the insights provided by the algorithm are correct or not.
Yeah, the
Personal
interesting
opinion.
human in the loop, that's important. I think we need that. The interesting thing with this LLM still is when they are wrong, and you tell them sometimes they are wrong, they try to convince me that I'm wrong. They kick back and say, "What are you doing there?" And they don't, there are no feelings, so they don't feel responsible. They can come to a wrong conclusion, insist that the wrong conclusion is right, and the company goes fast. And the interesting thing in your vita is you not only were at MIT, Stanford, and have experience in the old Soviet Union, you also worked in the industry. So it's not academic discussion that we have here. You worked with Thermo Fisher and Sartorius. This just are just two, but correct me if I'm wrong and forgot something. And I trusted ChatGPT too much with the analysis. Um, the problem now we have with AI is out there. People use it and people love it. I mean, when I think OpenAI went in a couple of months to 100 million users, so there was a huge uptake. So there is a need on the market, and
Yep.
then you need to lead these companies. What's your advice to the leadership teams? What should they do now in this situation? There are risks. They are not perfect, the tools, but people want to use it. How is that for leaders?
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk about, let's say, the less esoteric things. I think we see a lot of the news about how McKinsey has let go of lots of consultants because now they can
Mm,
do this, that, and the other with a model. Great, I love it. Um, as a consultant, part of my work is on the commercialization side. So I sometimes run these experiments, right? What would ChatGPT suggest for commercialization of a particular tool? And once again, it comes out with a suggestion that it's very confident in. And so I can see how for leadership, it's often tempting to say, consultants so expensive. I'm going to go with this much more, much cheaper way of doing this, right? I'm just going
mm,
to ask ChatGPT. The problem with that is that you could then pursue a path that steers you much away from an optimized way of doing things, or it's a completely wrong direction, and you won't know until many months down the road. So now you've invested lots, but down the wrong path. And so my suggestion is still talk to somebody who's commercialized things in the past, even if maybe a new way that we work in is that the company comes up with their own strategy with the assistance of an agent, and then they bring that to an expert, and expert suggests, so this might work, this might not work. Maybe that's a new way. I don't know kind of what the path forward is, but I think going with just what the agent suggested to you is very risky. And then I think we have this other kind of idea that we're going to implement AI and now we can compensate for, the 40-50% reduction in the workforce that we've had to go through because of the winter in biotech that we're experiencing. And I think it's not quite as easy as that, unfortunately, right? Because the expertise that's lost in the layoffs, I think that's going to be very traumatic for the companies. I think in the past, it's going to touch on knowledge management agents, but in the past, we've gone through some phases where we had to lay people off for 2-3 months. And let's just go with some basic thing. We had a piece of equipment that nobody remaining at the company knew how to fix, but you can probably get by for 3 months.
mm,
Now we're in a much longer stretch of this. So we're having to find ways to operate without that expertise. And I think that's very, very tough. The experience that I'm leaning on from my life is I was leading a team, and there was somebody on my team who had been at the company for 30 years. He was retiring. So my job was to, in these 2 months before his retirement, download all of his knowledge so that when he leaves, we don't have to bother him with how to run this and that machine and so on, how to fix this protocol, right? But it's such an immense task to do that in a short time frame. So I think there's a massive opportunity for AI-based companies to come in and do this download of knowledge from the workers. I mean, my dream is that we have a little camera as people execute on the SOP that gives some visual basis, some tacit knowledge that we can add into the written documents to help us run processes with a leaner workforce. So I think it's not going to be as simple as we can now compensate for all that's lost because of the economic situation that we're in. We can probably gain some efficiency, but it's, again, going back to the simplification, you have to know what the best way of doing something is, and then you can automate, amplify, and so on. If you don't know, then it's you're just doing more efficiently something that might not be on the good track. So
Yeah, yeah,
investigating what the good track is, I think, is key.
yeah. I totally agree. I think we are still early with LLMs, and this is just they try to solve every problem with LLMs currently, which is usually at the big peak, at the first peak of the Dunning-Kruger cycle. Before we crash and maybe we are in too much trouble. I tried to use this tool in a sales context, and what's really interesting for me was that in the last year, ChatGPT seemed to have been trimmed towards pleasing people. What it means in a sales context is
Mhm.
that ChatGPT tries to agree to everything a customer wants, which means a customer doesn't want to pay very often. So ChatGPT then comes back with, yeah, you get this for free, you get this on top of that. Yeah, we agree on that. And the thing is, when you just work with chatbots in a sales context and you don't understand what the risks are and remove all the humans who intervene and say, no, you can't give our cars away for free to a customer because the customer wants it, you really risk ruining your company at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you can put some constraints, right? To say this is the space within which you should be operating. And I think in the sales context, it could be these are the things we will never give away. This is your we kind of have this for the sales teams now, right? We tell them you can operate within 5 or 10% of the price, but you cannot really drop below a 10% discount, something
Mhm.
like this. So I think we can give these rules to the agents, but I maybe want to even abstract further away from that to organizational values. So I think implementation of these constraints will be key in the broader context. So I'll start with an example. Let's say we're 20 years from now and we have another biotech winter. So we're now fully agentic, and I am a CEO. I'll go to the
Agentic.
agent and I say, give me a path through this winter. I want to survive. And it says, yeah, fire 90% of your workforce. Well, that's definitely going to give me more of a runway because I've just laid off all these people. But maybe that's not really consistent with my values of retaining talent, with my values as an organization of respecting humans. There are other ways that we can approach this furlough, this reduction of pay, right? All these different things other than just lay everybody off. And I think that that's a kind of code of ethics internal to our organization, my organization's value that we can bake into this the algorithm as a constraint. Another one of these to think about, right, is sustainability. I can maybe ask 20 years from now, I ask my agent, what's the best way to synthesize this? And maybe it's going to give me the cheapest way, but it's going to use all kinds of toxic chemicals. Now, if a value of my organization is sustainability and building green processes, I have to tell that to the agent, right? I want it to know what my values are so that it gives me a balanced, optimized suggestion that, yes, gives me good ROI so that I can power commercially saving people's lives. That's key. But I also say the environment is important to me. I want to always be 30% less in energy, right? Something like this. So I actually see this as, I know we think of values as sometimes fluffy, but I think this time is an opportunity for us to really lean in and understand who we are as an organization. What do we truly believe about ethics, morality, humans, the planet, and then feed all of that into the AI that we're implementing.
It's a very good point. When you talk about agents, you mean artificial intelligence agents.
That's
The
right.
interesting thing was when I
AI
think
agents, very
AI,
casually.
AI agents, when I think back to the 80s when I started programming with BASIC, the great thing with BASIC was you structure a program, and every time when I pressed run and wrote run and pressed it, enter, and the program executed, I could be 100% certain that the computer executed the program in exactly the order that I wanted it to. And to challenge your assumption a little bit with these agents, I also hoped when I understand the process well enough, and let's stay with the sales example. I mean, it's a lot of every company
Mm-hmm.
needs to sell. When you understand your sales process, when you understand the customer personas, their
Yep.
problems, what they buy into, where
Yes.
they want to pay and
Yes.
not, you can codify it in a textbook. You can write the
Mhm.
process, a
Yes.
description, you can outline every single email. And what I was hoping for with LLMs is then you can take these folders, these binders, and just throw it into LLMs, and you have your perfect agent that executes exactly what you want, but it doesn't. This is so frustrating. 10 times, yes, it might work, but then you have this one time where it doesn't work, and it comes back with something completely ridiculous. And this can derail your company at the end of the day, because when it's just a big agreement, so yes, take all my equity and I'm fine with it, then it derails you. Do you think agents are really capable of executing instructions according to the plan they got?
I will challenge you on this somewhat because I think the value of agents, and let's just focus on the commercial space, is that they're going to be able to tailor that framework that you described, the book. They're going to
Mm-hmm.
tailor that to the specific customer or potential customer that they are working on with, and so on. And it's going to be high throughputing this tailored, customized approach in ways that you just could not possibly pay a commercial team to do, right? So I think that's sort of the beauty of it. But it's that balance between how to make sure that the tailoring doesn't then disrupt the process that you know works well. So, but it's such nascent state at this point. I don't think it's possible to answer your question as to whether the agents will be breaking or not breaking. I mean, maybe, right? Sometimes you hire, sticking with sales, you hire a salesperson who has a very different approach to like the way that your organization typically runs. And there's a huge value to that person because maybe they will find another way. Maybe thinking in this from the math perspective, maybe the path that you have in the organization is a local minimum. Maybe there's a global minimum that your new different way of doing things can get you to. Local minimum meaning that you will put even less, or a global minimum, right? You put in less effort than you were before to get the same ROI or better ROI. So I think if the agents, we can maybe map it out, right? Say, again, thinking from the math perspective, you have variability, you have the leeway to vary that textbook process by 10%, 20%, whatever it is. You can explore the space around, or maybe go to a completely different path. And there could be huge value to that in and of itself. Again, throughputing your testing, helping you, you know, explore the design space, so to say, go into the kind of bioprocessing language, but apply to the commercial framework.
I agree to the point that you made with testing, where you say, okay, AI is it's a great testing ground. So you can test different reactions to different emails, to
Mm.
different conversations. You can fine tune your tone. You get 10 suggestions. How does it sound when I say it harshly? How does it sound when I say it politely?
Yeah.
And you then have the full scale, and this works fine. What I'm not really convinced and what I tried is in the sales context to really use AI and thought maybe we can accelerate the process. And when we write, I mean, the hard thing in selling is you need to talk to people, you need to listen to people closely. You can't just say, okay, talk for 30 minutes and then I send you something and the deal is done. You really need to relate to them, understand their
Yeah.
problem, and then provide a solution, especially in the biotech B2B context and in pharma B2B. But LLMs really don't work well when I just try to feed an old email into the LLM and say, okay, this is the minutes from the last call, and now please create an offer tailored to this person, and you have the other 10 offers already. They just sometimes come up with just ridiculous things in the mail. And when I trust LLMs and say, I now just send it to the potential customer without double checking it,
Yeah.
you might have given a year's worth of services away for free. And LLMs does do that.
So a couple points to that. I think again, this is a very young tool.
Mm.
So I do, for as a technocrat at heart, I do firmly believe it will get better in terms of that consistency. But I think the other side, maybe counter to what you were saying, the, the agents can exhibit empathy that is better than what you get from another human. So you have lots of the news kind of in the normal human domain, but thinking about regulated industries and healthcare, uh, Google presented on this on their tool. I think it's called Amy, but they compared empathy ratings by patients of their AI tool versus their physician, and the AI tool scores better. So I think there's a massive opportunity in terms of that tuning into the customer and being able to give them a good experience, right? Because
Mm.
the AI agent can be a great listener. So I think it can be massively helpful for the commercial function. But again, right, it's the risk of it going badly with one of the customers, and you were talking about giving away a year worth of services. I would even argue that that's not near as bad as you have a key account
Mm.
that your agent just said something completely unrelated to, and it probably used your name, your email, and now you've lost the key account because they think that you're insane or didn't
Yeah,
read the previous messages, right? I mean, I
it's
think
very
at that
strange.
relationship level, it could be much more detrimental. So for now, I think we're still, in this proofreading and so on, but I have every hope that the tech will match a higher standard, and we'll get to a less supervision, more reliability situation.
No, it's really an interesting discussion and challenge for companies at the end of the day. I mean, you feed data into systems, confidential data. I'm not so sure the point that you mentioned about empathy. I really like the conversation. I mean, I use it a lot, these tools, to understand them better and what I can do and cannot do. And I really love these discussions that I have with ChatGPT or Grok, where I say, please check this post for me. Grok, for example, started with that and bring me more information. Is this true? And where is the source coming from? And then they come back with a solution. Takes time, you wait, and you get a solution. And I say, no, this is not right. This is definitely not right. And then I sit down and say, so now I tell the system that you're wrong. And the
Yeah.
interesting thing is, they come back with empathy. I understand your frustration. I sit here and say, I'm not frustrated. I'm not frustrated. So stop insinuating that I'm frustrated. And then the second part is very interesting. They say, but the information is right. And I say,
Interesting.
where is the empathy here? I mean, it's just wrong information with telling the user that they are frustrated. And many people just take it at face value and say, okay, now I'm frustrated. This is a tool that you can use to manipulate people at the end of the day. They read, they feel,
Absolutely.
and then they act.
There are studies on how convincing the agents can be in advertising. And this is,
Mhm.
again, there are academic groups who are studying this at scale, and it's the same, like two-way street, flip side of the coin, right? Where it can be a tool. It's at the end of the day, it's just technology. You can use it for good. You can use it for not so good. So I think this is such a key time to focus on the values, the correct approaches that work, and amplify and scale that. I know this is probably the third time I'm saying this on this call, but it's just, if you think about it as a tech, I think it maybe shifts your framework and hopefully helps pivot towards this understanding of who you are, what you actually want to achieve. I think it's a different kind of technology than some of the other ones because usually when you bring in something new like automation, right? We've been trying to do automation in manufacturing for the longest time. There's resistance from your workforce. And so you have to overcome that hurdle. Here, you're in a place where people want to use it. It's very different tech from that perspective. The adoption is already rolling.
Mm.
So you have to take a somewhat of a different address some different set of risks. uh, Adoption is no longer your main concern, right? You need to be driving the framework, the governance, making sure that you protect yourself, protect your company, protect your IP, and know how as the tech gets adopted.
Yeah, let's take the conversation back to the corporate level. How should we deal with AI? What's your framework that you recommend for CEOs in the biotech and the pharma industries?
Yeah, I think that there are many pieces to this, right? But to me, the very first and the most important one is privacy, making sure that your data does not leak anywhere. And most companies have been working with some data security companies, consultants. They're in a good place from that perspective, but AI brings in new risks. So you have to think about all of the ways that the data can flow out of your organization, and then work with your technology developers to your AI tech providers to make sure that they put the guardrails in place to accomplish your goals of privacy, confidentiality, compliance, or all the other things that you want to put in place. I'll just give one example because I think it's an easy one, an approachable one. So let's say we have a database that you are implementing. Uh, and this database has AI driven suggestions for search queries. So maybe you put in your protein name and then it suggests some additional search terms to give you some insights. Great. We want this. We want the intelligence within organizations to be built. Awesome. Problem is that the AI suggestions for search terms are trained on user data. So now you have information data flowing out of your organization to train this algorithm to suggest search terms. If you're searching for GLP-1 so hot, lots of companies are searching for it. Probably not as big a deal. But if you're working on some obscure target, this is your super highly confidential IP, you want to get some intelligence about the research, for example, that's been carried out on this protein. Yes, of course you do. But if you query that in, you have to keep in mind that now you've disclosed essentially to the system and everybody who's working with the system that you're working on this. If you have one other competitor who's working on this target, they essentially can see what you have searched for.
Mm.
So, of course, you can then guide the technology provider to help you protect your search queries, but it's not a default, at least in the world that we live in today. As a customer, as a therapy developer, you have to ask for it. You have to ask the questions. How is your provider handling that privacy and confidentiality side? And I work with both sides, with the AI tech companies and with therapy developers, and as well as with regulators, right? So I think it's an ecosystem question today. How can we get these tools to be usable for us in a regulated industry with strict IP requirements? So I think it takes action from all parties. We need the customers, therapy developers to mandate, I need this, or else I won't be able to work with you. We need the tech developers to be willing and open to make amendments, implement stricter systems. And then, of course, have the regulators step in and say, these are the standards that you have to have in place. This is something that I'd love for us to have is a kind of certification, that test run that we run on every AI tool to say, okay, it meets, maybe it's a 10-point score system or something like this, right? It needs 7, 8 points out of 10. So then as a customer, as a therapy developer, you can assess the risk level of using a particular tool versus the benefit that you're going to get out of this tool. Because it's always an equation, right? You have to balance these things. But if there are any technology people out there thinking along the same lines of setting standards reflective of the code of conduct that we have in this regulated industry, I would love to connect. Please reach out. And then I am just really grateful to the regulators, the industry organizations who've been having this conversation with me. I think this will be tremendous for our space to have some level of standard. We can think of it as, for example, ratings for parts. Let's say for Boeing, right? There have to be a certain level of quality, and we have some of those implemented for hardware. We just don't yet have it for AI. But I'm confident that we can get to a place where we have some standardized system of assessing tools.
Yeah, there's a lot of risk and uncertainty involved at this stage, what I understand from your explanation. But what does that mean now for the biotech company actually researching a new therapy? I mean, there are no standards on the market, and using ChatGPT is tempting. So when you do a clinical trial, just throwing the patient data into an LLM is tempting to get
Please
feedback.
don't throw patient data into ChatGPT. Um, yeah, I mean, I think again, we're so as scientists, we're so driven to get to an answer. We want the insight, and I think the potential that AI opens up for these insights, especially if we're able to look across these massive data sets that are comprehensive. So again, going back to cell therapy, right? If we think about that vein to vein workflow, if we are able to analyze a large enough data set, we can finally get at the answers for what matters to be able to deliver an efficacious therapy that you can, in fact, manufacture with reliability. I think this would be tremendous. I'm all for it. I want this. When I'm a patient, I want to have this as an option available to me. Um, but you just have, I think, as a therapy developer, you have to ask questions of your technology provider. And I'm happy to say that some of the AI tech providers I work with are so focused on quality, reliability, privacy. I love this. Um, I want them to also then be more focused on commercial so that they can propagate this great technology that they have. I'm sure I'm not going to say anything groundbreaking, but if you build it, they will come. It's not true. You have to bring them to see your great thing that you've built.
Mm,
Commercial
mm.
is not an afterthought. It's a core part of your approach, so that you can then make the money to feed better development. So I want the tech companies to think about if you believe in this highly reliable tool that you're building, please make some commercial efforts so that your potential customers can see the great value. But I think where we are today is that the potential customers are not, they don't have the list of questions to ask of the tech providers. So I think we have to get to a point where there's some understanding of the risks. And so therapy developers in the routine of asking these 20, 30, however many questions. Maybe the burden will be alleviated once we have some regulatory framework, we have a certification program, like we can say, out of these 10 points to 9.5. So you probably don't have to worry about the 30 questions. Maybe you ask 2 or 3, and the rest have already been by default answered with the certification program. But as we're not there yet, and as we're so innovative and we want to be on the edge of technology, I think you have to take control and protect yourself and your organization in a very thoughtful way.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. And then people are seduced by OpenAI, by Alphabet, the big companies out there who also wants to sell their solutions and promise everything. And it's just not working in pharma and biotech so easy.
Yes, I think we're very different from the day-to-day consumer, because the impact of wrong answers, of misinformation is absolutely devastating. The impact of leakage of data is devastating. And like we talked about before, right? Sometimes you won't know that your data has left your organization.
Mm.
You might not know for years. That's really scary. There's not an immediate readout. So you have to ask the questions up front. And maybe if I can just say here, I think that I'm such a believer in collaboration. I think if we can get, by working together, we can get to answers so much faster and at a lower cost. A lot of hesitancy that I hear from therapy developers, obviously, is that they don't want to share their data. But I want us to think about this in the bigger context. So if you're collaborating, the tech is here to do this more privately and confidentially and securely, that you're actually retaining your data and not sharing it with the 10, 20 companies that you're collaborating with. Meanwhile, as you implement AI, not asking questions about privacy, you might be sharing your data with the whole wild world. So it's the balance of the balance, the discrepancy of those two things, I think, existing in the same time and space, I find to be a very interesting place. But it is my firm hope and belief that as we develop a better understanding of data privacy, security, confidentiality in this new world of AI, internally, we will then become more comfortable collaborating with others in a private and confidential way.
I think there are key points in there. So one key point is that LLMs are just a new technology, and also artificial intelligence agents are a new technology in their infancy. It's not a matured system yet. When the funny part is you talked about therapy companies, so they are sometimes very hesitant to collaborate with other companies, but I experience a little bit less hesitant to upload contracts into LLMs to analyze them, especially when it's contracts from Asian countries, for example, that are in Chinese and in English. Um, just upload them, and then
Interesting point.
then you have the I mean, an LLM like ChatGPT is basically public domain. So when the data left the company, and I'm not really sure that people are aware of this risk. When you have a contract in with some details, when you can read a lot out of a contract and know what stage the company is, what they are working on. Sometimes there is confidential data in there, so you have the confidential data then also in LLMs. It's really complicated. So what we need at the end of the day is not just the LLM from OpenAI, it's just the base layer. So you need really, like in old times, like in the 90s with the internet, you need this layer in between that makes sure that this base layer fulfills all regulatory needs that we have in pharma. And this is a huge space for new companies. And unfortunately, you mentioned it before, they are not expert in selling. So they produce their solutions and rarely invest with their investors in commercialization, in getting out to the customers, in understanding the customers. How can we fix that?
Well, I think as we talked about before, right? I think for new founders, it's this recognition that revenue is key. I know you're really excited about the tech that you're developing. You want to get more data in, get the better model. Maybe you're in stealth mode. You don't want to reveal all these things, but you sort of have to sell what you have today to feed the development of what you want to build. Um, I think there's a lot of excitement on the investor side now about the usage of AI. So it's like if you put the word AI in your pitch, then everything's more seamless. But we have to imagine that this is not an eternal fountain, that it will inevitably we'll see some of the slowness of adoption, slowness of outcomes, and so on, and we'll get to AI being less of a trigger for cash.
Oh,
this
hi.
is baby. Say hello. And I think that founders who think about how they will feed themselves more sustainably, feed their companies, they will invariably do better. This we have seen time and again, right? This is not anything new. AI is just a new kind of technology. So I think focusing on that commercialization, I'm sure everybody's tempted to just look at ChatGPT and ask it what's the best strategy to commercialize. I would argue the more niche your application is, the worse the answers that you're going to get will be. So talk to somebody who has commercialized tech before. Obviously, I'm in the space. I love working with companies on this, and I think there's so many ways that we have seen that things do not work. So moving around those obstacles and making sure that you get to successful commercialization is key. But the focus on bringing the money in. It has to be a sustainable operation. That's my suggestion.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Are there any best practices in drug development that you see in your work, where companies successfully use artificial intelligence to improve certain areas of the workflow and that already work and fulfill, recall it, all compliance risks that we have?
So I'll maybe separate those two things out. I think we have some really exciting tech in drug development. We have yet to see some truly de novo candidate in the clinic, at least as of today. So that will be huge. Um, I think that on the compliance side, that's more in your GMP space, so away from drug discovery, and there's emerging and evolving guidance. I think from my perspective, the EMA is leading that effort. I love that we're approaching it, right? It's a separate guidance, so you can update it more rapidly. They understand that this will be a rapid space, so they're continuously working on the guidance. I see an opportunity for the Middle East to also lead some of those efforts and develop collaboratively with EMA and other regulators a framework. I think on the regulatory side, harmonization would be tremendous, even in terms of cost reduction for therapy developers, right? If we could have some alignment across different regulatory agencies, that'd be great. Thinking about compliance being key in your regulated space, and then on the, I'd say that's the priority there, while privacy obviously is a priority. But then on the drug development side, there's some new and exciting things. I would, again, before you're bringing a tech inside, would think about privacy, would think about reliability of those insights. These are questions we don't see people asking very often, but they really should. And then once again, building in your values into the algorithms that you're bringing in.
Let's look at the entire drug development process from drug discovery up to bringing it to the market. And let's look at the benefits and risks that AI has in these areas and what it means for collaboration. When I look at drug discovery at the early stages, there are currently companies like in Silicon Medicine, for example, using AI tools to finding new targets, to finding also new solutions, new molecules to model them for these targets. I always wondered how that works with patents, patentability, when they just feed the data into LLMs. I mean, what I thought at the beginning was these are just unique models for one company. But then I learned, no, they want to use it for more companies. But then it's just sort of you feed something in their database that's really new, innovative. But on the other hand, you disclose the innovation already. What's the risk there? What do I miss in this area?
I think on this patenting side, so Goodman had a really spectacular law firm. They had a really spectacular AI day at Bio
Mhm,
earlier
mhm,
this
mhm.
year. They had a really thoughtful approach with that human in the loop, because aside from, I think, at least as of June, it was just South Africa where you didn't have to assign a patent to a human. Everywhere else, the human has to be on the patent. So you can strategically place people along that workflow to ensure that whatever you discover is patentable. And I think that's like such an interesting area from the regulatory perspective, from the legal perspective, right? Um, I think for drug target discovery, we have seen such immense impact of these collaborative approaches where you take a massive data set. The project that I had the great fortune of interfacing with was the Pharma proteomics
Mhm.
project, where at the time it was 10 largest pharma pulling together. I think now it's 14 participants in the round two, but it's pulling cash together so you can fund these massive studies. And so already in that first run of proteomic analysis of the UK Biobank samples, they discovered, I think, over 10,500 new potential drug targets. So maybe now we weave in some AI in there, and which is, I think, what's happening for round two. And you just feed so much more data into the algorithm, you are going to get better answers. So to me, drug discovery is such a big topic. It's so expensive. It's so
Mhm.
difficult to do, but so important so that we don't all continue with the gold rush after the one target that we see works in the clinic and then everybody floods that space, right? We want to get away from that because they're all those patients who are maybe not served because we're all going after this one thing. So, but even if you have a great model, it's still going to be better if you pull the data together from across companies. So to me, the fact that these large players have been able to come up with a framework, a legal framework to share those insights in the pre-competitive collaboration space, to me, that's a wonderful alignment of the goodness of humanity with the individual company values and goals. I mean, it's so beautiful. And it's not the only collaboration. There's many collaborations that exist. I think at some point I mapped out maybe 18 that are between various
Mhm.
combinations of companies, but we know how to do this. We have legal teams that have figured out how to share data and keep the IP. I think the upgrade that we're going to get with AI and some of the tech developments in terms of decentralized data analysis is that now we can keep the data private. We don't actually have to put the data that we have across companies into one spreadsheet. So it's better. It's more. We can be more confidential in the way that we collaborate. So I think it's just such an open and wonderful space from here on out. And I think AI will play a massive role in the collaborative approaches.
So it basically helps getting people more to collaborate with each other and breaking up the silos. And there are some benefits when you combine AI also with smart contracts. You can also make sure that the investments they made when they disclose data are then also returned to them when something hits the market. So there's a lot of potential, and it's moving in the right direction, if I understood you right, from what you see in the industry.
I mean, just the number of collaborations that we've already executed on as an industry, the number that are in progress, I think are all really good indicators. What I find is the challenge to propagating that collaborative approach is that in large organizations, sometimes folks working over here don't know that folks over here have figured out a collaborative approach. So it's this brand awareness almost for collaborations, that some of that internal, some of the external awareness that we have to build. But I mean, that's what I talk about in my talks. That we have a way, we have a framework for collaborating and working together. We just need to apply it to these new domains like cell therapy manufacturability is one. I think figuring out which organoid fits with which clinical outcome, right? What's the best readout, most predictive of a particular clinical outcome in a given indication? I think that's another great area to collaborate. And with all of the momentum that there now is in organoids because of the FDA regulation from I think April, I think that's prime. I'm excited for us to really look closely at that space and figure it out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with AI, with social media, with also these new tools like Zoom that we are using now, you really can bring people together and help them collaborate better. This is for the drug discovery part. So hopefully, at the end of the day, we get better targets, we get more solutions, and we get faster through this phase. It really takes a long time to preclinical candidates and to candidates that are approved then at the end of the day by the FDA, so they can go into clinics. Uh, what benefits do you see on the clinical stage? We talked about risks earlier, so now let's just stay on the benefit side. What can I do on the clinical side in drug development?
Yeah, there's been a lot of investment on the kind of biomarker side of things, right? And personalizing therapies. We know from NCI match study that biomarker associated therapy selection gives 6 times more people benefit. So I think it's the evidence is here. It's clear that we'll do better if we personalize therapies, right? So I think leveraging AI to map out what are the predictive biomarkers and then finding the people to deliver these therapies to. Again, it's a balance of patient privacy rights. So we'll have to navigate that landscape in a thoughtful way. But for people who want the therapy but don't know that it exists, right? It could be life saving to help them even know about the existence of a given therapy. With cell therapies, we've gone through this for a few years, where there are massive efforts to figure out how can we make doctors aware of the existence of these novel therapies. How can we make patients aware of them? A good friend, Tracy Ryan, who's at NK Core, she's a mother of a child, and she developed therapy together with scientific team, of course, to help this child survive. And they've been battling this for many, many years. But she talked about how in the initial stages when her daughter was just diagnosed, she spent weeks in front of the laptop just trying to find a cure. So it's great that she's so resilient that after this traumatic diagnosis, she can move on and be in front of the laptop and be searching. That's not everybody. That's not every person. So I think we have to, it's our obligation to make it easier to find this information. And so actually a conversation that I had just earlier today was about how perhaps ChatGPT could be a tool to raise awareness of some of these therapies, and it's certainly not focused on that today. But maybe it's another channel that we can bring that information closer to the patients, because we sort of know that everybody's tempted and using ChatGPT to find information.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons why I started this podcast. I mean, people use LLMs to get information, so we need to make sure that the right information reaches the people when they search for it. And podcasts are a very good example, a very good way to distribute information to LLMs, and later, hopefully, they retrieve it then when someone is using it. But what I thought when you were talking is I experienced the pharma industry as an old-fashioned industry. I mean, it started somewhere in the 1800s with the industrialization, and then was designed basically for one concept over decades to develop one solution and then deliver it to many patients. And now what you said, my understanding is that we have a really paradigm shift in the industry, that we move away from this, we want one molecule, put it into one pill, and then just ship it out on the market, to a more personalized approach. Is pharma really ready for that? Structural?
I think that's an excellent question, and I would love to bring. It's great to get some folks from Pharma to speak to this. I think there's such an ethical side to this question, right? If we know that a personalized therapy will work better for the patient, it is almost our obligation to make it available to them, to help them find it, and to deliver this personalization. And that maybe propagates also to investor side, who all want maybe to see a blockbuster. And I understand, as a commercial person, I understand this. But it's also that if you know that a tailored drug will work better than a blockbuster, can we shift the way that we think about investment in this space to have math that takes into account pure dollar value ROI, but also this humanitarian ethical aspect? And I love the way that Rob Tressler from Excellus talks about it, where he says that we are in healthcare, not money care. If you were purely focused on the cash, money care is the finance industry, right? That's the place. But in healthcare, it's a more complex an equation. It's about improving people's lives. And I think that companies, therapy developers, when they fundraise, right, of course, they're struggling with the hockey stick. How do we make the hockey stick work? I'm working on an article with Ryan Murray from Valsource, hopefully will be coming out here in the next few weeks, on the ethics side of it, right? How can we think of this perhaps somewhat differently than other types of investment?
What's your concept to rethink investing in? I mean, at the end of the day, investment is always about making money. So this is a precondition, um, not for an unethical reason and not because people are greedy, but at the end of the day, you have to reinvest in the next generation. So if you don't make a profit from the old generation, at one point in time, you lacked simply the capital to reinvest in the next generation. So these profit-driven industries are profit-driven for a reason, to be able to improve the quality of the entire system. Do you have an idea how a new concept could look like?
Yeah, super question. I think once I figure that out, I will sell that and I will be off to buying an
I
island.
was hoping.
But I think some of it, right, is this just the complexity of the math, and in that, if you sell more of therapies that are less efficacious, the actual impact on the patient population might be not as good as if you sell smaller batches, but of very personalized therapies. And we're sort of moving to that, right? We don't really have to make an argument for this. With all of the novel types of therapies, with cell therapies, it's very clear that it's so much more precision medicine oriented. So I think we have that understanding. It's just how can we get away from the hockey stick 10x, which is just such a difficult slide for companies to build as they fundraise. So I think it'll be interesting to see how this evolves.
I mean, the hockey stick 10x is driven mostly by the high failure rate in the end of the day. When you need to invest money and get a high hit rate of failures, you need to. I mean, Christoph Langauer brought in his speeches brings the example that from 10,000 molecules, only one hits the market at the end of the day, but you need this 10,000 number to find the one.
I think this will change because of AI, right?
Mm.
Because you can de-risk and make that pool smaller in the beginning with all the predictive tools. And there's so much tech being developed on that front to essentially reduce failure rates, that even before we get to humans, we have so much a better understanding of the toxicity profile and the binding profile, right? All of the different pieces, that the routine testing that we can approach from that predictive perspective. So I think that that equation of the 10,000 will change.
This is something I'm really curious to see in the future. The big question, I mean, when you look at these two approaches, you have the Six Sigma approach where you have just an existing product and make it better. And what you do there is reducing the failure rate, which really works well. You understand the process, you understand the product, and Elon Musk is an expert in that, to just improve and streamline every single process and take it out. But then you have this creative process where you really try to find a new solution or identify a new problem. And there naturally the failure rate is high. And when I hear the claims from artificial intelligence companies, I say, okay, we reduce the failure rate in the creative part. Yes, you can do that, but in the old system, you also risked that you reduced the hit rate. I mean, what you want is basically finding the one molecule that works, wants to invest a lot of money in the one molecule, and wants to drive down the investment in the molecules that don't work. But in the old system, without AI, these 9,999 failures were necessary to get to the one. When you reduce the failure rates, then you also reduce the risk to find the one molecule that works in the end of the day. And what you end up with is 100 potential candidates, but none of them works.
So, couple of pieces to that.
Mm.
I think it helps us separate that into multiple phases, right? So on the discovery side, it's, I think, in many ways the same question as we discussed earlier. For this is your 10-20% exploration space.
Mm.
Your we have something that we think will work, but can you work around it, explore that design space some more to find new candidates, identify new targets, and so on. So you give more of a leeway to the algorithm. The development side, I think, is predicting developability. For example, we've done this for small molecule to some degree. We have a standard and proprietary algorithms for predicting developability of mAbs. I would love for us to get to this point with cell therapies, but I think it's, in the end, we could have a checklist. If you've discovered some new compound modality and so on, you have a checklist. These are 10 criteria you have to fulfill in order to be able to manufacture it. So then your development can be much more streamlined if you know what these criteria are. And so you won't end up in a space like we've hit recently, right? Where you're in the clinic, but you're finding that actually manufacturing the drug is not, it's only some of the time that you're able to do that. I think this part we can figure out. And to me, that's a very collaborative space, because we're all going to face very similar challenges in manufacturing, just given the biophysics, biochemistry of the molecule that we're working on.
Yeah, a lot is moving, and I think the potential is the automation, and just doing the small things can also, going for the quick wins can really, when I look at the market side, I mean, there are a lot of therapies on the market, but doctors are usually not aware of that. They have to treat patients and no time for education. So if you can improve that, you already benefit the patient. Personalized medicine, if you just can find the right medicine for that person with AI, it's perfect. And when you look on the drug development, I'm not so sure that we really get down from the failure rate at the end of the day, but can run much faster through the entire process. I'm not convinced that we really should aim at reducing the failure rate. High failure is always a marker of high innovation and an innovative area. So failure is good in that space. And I would really not like to just try to streamline something that is necessary for innovation and
I
get
think
it
a
out.
way that you can think about reduction of cost and
Mm.
reduction of timeline for that is you're doing this in silico. So you're still trying a
Mm.
bunch of different things, but it's much cheaper to do because you don't actually have to pay for the media, the bioreactor, all these things, right? And there are, again, lots of companies working in that space, fewer than I would like. to see. But there's some really interesting, innovative in silico early PD. And I'd love for us to have deeper understanding on the actual my manufacturing side. So we will get there as well. But I think in this new age, we'll be able to condense a lot of the lab work by expanding our predictive capabilities. Again, reliability will be key in that part, because if you're predicting a process that then you discover 2 years down the road doesn't actually work, it worked great on the computer, but in the lab it doesn't work, right? So that then you've lost a lot of time and money. So reliability, once again, in our space is just key. So as you're bringing in an in silico modeling provider, ask them questions.
Yeah, and we need more VCs in that space who are willing to take risks at the end of the day and bet on these companies. And in silico is, I think, a huge opportunity, but we have not enough investment capital in that space. My opinion. What is your opinion on that?
When I've looked at investments, it seems that a lot of money has gone into AI on drug discovery side and patient stratification, therapy personalization from that perspective. I think this development side, maybe it's not perceived as big of a cost, which is maybe why there's less investment going in there. But to me, when I look at it, it's much more, let's say, streamlined, similar, operationalizable. So I think it's actually a prime area to be developing technologies in. We see some of the big players making investments there. Would love to see more VC money going in. I think my assessment for why this has been an underfunded area is that we kind of want to solve the biggest problem, the biggest value, the biggest cost driver. But so I base this off of this book, How to Be a Millionaire. And that whole book is about how to save in tiny little pieces. It's not about how to make the massive paycheck. It's that you save a little bit and a little bit, and in the end, you have a lot of money. So I think of this development side as that we're going to save a little bit here and there, but in the end, the acceleration that you're going to get, the cost savings are going to be significant.
I think it's a sales. Sorry to interrupt you, but I think it's a sales problem from the company side, not so much from the VCs. I mean, VC side in Europe is underfunded, so this is a regulatory part. But what I see from the company side is that they not sell what VCs are looking for at the end of the day. VCs always need to make these, are looking for these 10x returns. This is pretty simple. It's the mechanic of the industry because they want to
Yeah.
take high risks, high risk of failure, and need a huge return. What I rarely see when I talk with founders of AI companies, for example, you brought the example with entire lab models run in silico. So you don't need a rat model or a dog model or animal models in general. You just run it on a computer in the cloud, get the results, and can move on. And the FDA seems to move in that direction. The company that nails that and can really say we can simulate the entire drug discovery part and preclinical development part, and you get in no time a candidate out of this that goes directly in the clinic, creates an entire new market and captures the entire market. But rarely an AI company says that to investors and say, look, I mean, what we do is remodeling the entire market. And when we win and when you make us win, we throw everybody else out of the market that operates in that space. I think it's a sales problem at the end of the day. When I look at the sales pitches, they are mostly, yeah, we do a little bit of here and a little bit of there. And it's like a project sales part. But we see, I really recommend reading The Power Law, for example, written by Sebastian Malaby. He brings a lot of excellent examples how Genentech started, why VC invested in Genentech. And this is basically the blueprint for how to sell to VCs. And when the founders are not convinced, they create a 10x case for a VC, they likely not get funding. And then we have the problem that they are not funded and then the solution doesn't hit the market. And then they need to go on the customer side. But then you have also the problem that they don't want to sell to customers. So it's a little bit a sales
And
problem on both ends.
And also, it's when they go to customers, I find that the language is still very mathy. It's very algorithm focused, but which is understandable, right? The founders probably is some level technical in AI, but you have to translate that
Yeah.
language to the customer. They're biologists, most of them. Some of them are data scientists, but they're still not AI engineers. And again, this is not a novel problem in any way. I have worked with lots of mechanical engineers who also, when they make a flyer about their new capex, it's very focused on that engineering language, and it takes some iterations to get away from the build and more towards the impact. And I think everybody knows they have to do that, but it's hard to do for yourself when it's your own product, right? So the value of bringing somebody who's a third party and kind of sits between you and the customer as a translator, I think is immense.
But they needs to do it. Then they needs to learn it. Sales to investors, it's also a sales problem. It's always this 10x. They need to deliver returns to their investors. It's pretty simple. So when a founder doesn't bring this 10x story, then the deal doesn't close with the investor. Same on the customer side, what you said. A customer needs to solve a problem. And if the technician doesn't connect with the problem of the customer won't buy the solution. So it's pretty much, they need these both mindsets, and they need to get people on the teams who love doing that.
Yes, yes, I completely agree.
It's really, time flies when you have fun. We are 10 minutes over our 2 hours. um,
Thank you for your time.
No, I really love that. Before I come to the final question, is there any topic that you want to emphasize at the end of our live stream?
I don't big themes, right?
Mhm.
One, I cannot say enough as a adopter of AI tech, asking questions and really thinking deeply about the privacy, confidentiality of your data. And then if you're in the regulated state, think about compliance and thinking about what are some of the next things that the regulators are going to ask for inevitably in 6 months, 12 months, and so on. Thinking about implementing your values to make sure the suggestions that your employees get, that you get from the algorithm, is reflective of your core beliefs. And going to the personal side, protecting yourself from the malevolent players out there. They are out there, whether you believe in their existence or not. So in the same way, thinking about the privacy of your data, making yourself less vulnerable. And there's so much research into the very consistent steps that these people take in order to get you to do whatever it is to serve them. So information's out there. Happy to point anyone who wants that. But we have to take advantage of the academic research that's been done. And then, bigger picture, I love for us to be more collaborative in this industry. I think the progress that we see with other industries where they're able to standardize and collaborate, I mean, it's just immense. Like for example, tech, right? How fast they were able to move because of open source code. I think for us, we're lagging in that, and I really hope that this difficult economic climate can help us think outside the box, because we still want to develop therapies that will save people's lives. So collaborating will offer a cheaper and likely faster way of getting those therapies to patients.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope, I mean, if somebody thinks bad actors don't exist, I would recommend going on social media online for an hour x.com, for example, and you see a lot of back and forth between people. So they exist. But when we leave this at the beginning of the conversation and now look into the future, and this is my final question to you, um, in the next 10 years, I mean, we are now in 2025. In 10 years, we are in 2035. And there is a lot of potential out there with AI, with robotics, with all these innovations that are currently in development. What's your most optimistic scenario when you can think it through? How will biotech and pharma look like in 2035 when everything happens according to your plan and you have unlimited money and can make this one scenario, this best case scenario, really happen in 10 years? How does the future look like for you?
Yeah, so I think at the core is that we have gone through these 10 years without massive losses of information by specific companies. We have gone through this without a collapse because we were thoughtful and really forward planning in our privacy, confidentiality, compliance, et cetera, strategies. I think in this 10-year view, I would love for AI to become a tool, technology to implement good things, to amplify the good behaviors, good part of our population, so that I kind of almost think of AI and humans as being one populace, maybe in some ways in the future. I don't know if it's 10 years or longer, but I would love for us to reduce that, average malevolent player rate of 5% down by amplifying the good algorithmic side. And then just this collaborative approach, I think will help move the industry so much more better, reliably, right? If you even think about measurements that different companies are taking in different ways, if we can analyze across the different ways, the outcome, the insight that we're going to get is going to be much more reliable than the one person with magic hands in your lab who can execute on this experiment and no one else. And we've all seen this type of experiment. So I think reliability will go up, the cost will go down, the timeline will go down if we can align ourselves better with that overarching initiative of bringing therapies to patients. And we have done this before, so I know we can do it. We can do this more often.
I enjoy this conversation a lot. I like your positivity and I love your balanced approach. So not on the one hand, you are not only positive and looking to build a better future and bring people to a more collaborative mindset, but you're also aware of the risks and that not everybody is a good player, that there are also bad players on the market, and want to help companies to understand both sides, the positive sides, what AI can do for them, but also on the other hand, make them aware of the risk. And I love this balanced approach that you bring to the table.
Thank you. Thank you. Life has made me balanced in that way. It wasn't my choice, but I think it's a more realistic perspective that will enable more actionable steps.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. Thank you very much for your time and for this amazing conversation, and let's catch up soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Christian. Thank you, everybody who's joining. I did really, really appreciate this. And please reach out on any of the topics or any of the other topics. So it was such a pleasure. Thank you for the great questions.
Thank you, and have a great day, and talk to you soon. Bye.
Have a lovely evening. Bye.
Thank you. We have heard today that artificial intelligence isn't just technology. It's trust, privacy, and values encoded into code. Kat showed us how the wrong use of data can derail entire companies, but also how the right frameworks can transform medicine, speed up discovery, and bring therapies to patients faster than ever before. And here is the real insight. AI will not replace humans, but leaders who know how to work with AI ethically, strategically, courageously will replace those who don't. If this conversation sparked something in you, here's one simple action. Please hit the follow button. I've seen the stats today and most of you listen without following. By following, you help this show grow and you make sure more rare deep tech voices like Kat's reach the world for free. And if you found value here, don't just follow. Come back next week. We have another remarkable guest who will challenge how you see the future, business, and yourself. Because this show is not just about listening, it's about learning how to lead and build the next generation of great deep tech companies in a world that's changing faster than ever. Have a great day.